ready to launch your podcast? It's time for Podcast Now with Restream, the live show that helps you plan, produce, and launch your podcast with the power of Restream. Here's your host, Ian Anderson Gray.
Well, hello, welcome to episode, I think it's 17. It's the last episode of Podcast Now. We need to play some sad music. Yes, indeed, all good things have to come to an end. Anyway, enough of that. It is exciting. I'm excited to be here, particularly because we have some amazing guests on with me today. We're having a bit of a panel discussion about podcasting, particularly podcasting from live streams. So if you have just joined, if you just started watching live, welcome to the show. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. I'd also love to know, what device are you watching on? Are you watching it on a Kindle, on an iPad, on a computer, on a phone? Let me know. And if you've got any questions for me or for my guest today, let us know. This show, as always, is powered by Restream. We're using Restream Studio, as always, which allows you to broadcast to a plethora of different channels. You can use Restream Studio to broadcast to all those channels. You can have up to 9 guests onto your show. It works beautifully, and you can highlight comments. Now, I can see who we got here. We've got Chanel watching from Pune in India. Great to see you watching on a PC. Awesome. And we've got, who else have we got here? We've also got 108 Dragons TV watching on YouTube as well. Hey, what's up? Brooklyn, New York on a PC. And my goodness, hello, we've got MC Lito watching from Japan. 2 streams in a day you've been watching today. End of the season. Will there be another season after this from my iPhone while my newest video is exporting on the computer? And Jeff C. I don't know who Jeff is, but he is watching from the green room. I'll be bringing Jeff in a little bit. Yeah, so just to say, this might be the last episode of Podcast Now, but there will be another show coming very soon. We're putting the finishing touches on that, and I can't wait to share that with you. We've also got Business Growth Ready, watching from Birmingham, UK, 32-inch bank screen on custom-built PC. I love that. That's awesome. And we've got a Rod watching from Turlock, California, watching on my Note 20 Ultra with Facebook. Awesome. And 108 Dragon TV saying, I use Restream for all my podcast streaming needs. It's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your comments. It's time to bring in my guests. So first of all, we've got the wonderful Louise Brogan. We've got Jeff C. And we've got Janet Murray. And Jeff is trying to look like his picture is frozen. It's not going to work on me. Look at that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. It's great to have you on. And I've invited you on. Not only are you great friends of mine, but you all have podcasts, and you all also have done some live streaming as well. So I thought it'd be great to bring you on to talk about this. So Louise, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Ian. Not too bad here.
You're doing well, and you're dialing in from Northern Ireland. Whereabouts in Northern Ireland?
Just outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, and it's quite a nice day today. So it's not raining, thank goodness.
And Jeff, you're in Texas. How are things going with you?
It's great. It's a good day too. I don't know why I'm inside right now. I had to come onto this show.
You make it sound like you were forced to come on the show.
I was pretty much, yeah, it was. There was no choice in the matter. Yeah. Janet, you're like, yeah, come on, whenever, do whatever. You're great, Janet. Not me. She just said, come on, get in here. You have to stay for the entire show. You got to do all this stuff. I tell you.
Yeah, well, there you go. That was that's the end of a beautiful friendship. But anyway, moving on to Janet. How are you doing, and where are you dialing in from?
I'm in Kent, just outside London, and I have a gripe about being sloppy seconds. I think that I was asked at the last minute, and maybe I was a replacement for someone else. So, yeah, we've all got complaints today.
So what time, Janet? Because I think that I was probably the last one. Probably he was like, I got to fill out this 4-person box thing. And
there we go. One of the things that we were going to talk about today was like bringing guests, how you actually go about bringing guests onto your podcast. And so I'm sure you're all going to tell me how you should do it. But I asked you all yesterday because because I'd only kind of worked out what we were going to talk about yesterday. It's not normally like that, but that is the way it was today. Just looking, we've got MC Lito saying, okay, good to hear there will be a new show. Absolutely. We've got Martin Buckland watching from Toronto, my second time today. And I think Jeff and I met you at Janet's conference.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was, that's and cool. Business growth ready. Love Janet's wallpaper. Yes. It's very nice. Very, very nice. Awesome. Right. Well, I'd love you to let me know. So Louise, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your podcast, because you do live streaming and you've got a podcast, but tell us about your podcast and why did you start one?
Oh my goodness. Well, I was inspired by other podcasters. So I think my podcast is it's coming up on its 200th episode. So It's 4 years old this year. And I just fell in love with podcasting. I listen to all you guys, actually. So I think I'm probably the late starter in the group. And it just seemed like such a brilliant way to get in front of people. And it's, for people who, like, I work out of my home. I've got 3 kids. When I started the podcast, they're all a bit younger. And it's something you can record any time that suits you. And then as long as you get it out on a certain day of the week, which I learned to put it on a scheduled day of the week, it's just a brilliant way to connect with people who are interested in what you do. And it's very specific. People look for podcasts on particular things. Mine is all about LinkedIn. And I think the familiarity or the closeness that the listener feels because they're walking along with you, talking inside their earphones or their earbuds in their head, and they feel really connected with you. And I think it's hard to get that with any other platform, I think, in business. I do live streams on a Friday on LinkedIn, but I don't put those out as the podcast. They tend to be connected to whatever came out on the podcast this week. So if I have a guest on the podcast on a Wednesday, I will bring that guest onto my LinkedIn Live to follow up the conversation on the Friday. And that's where I use the live streaming. So it's not the actual podcast that is streamed live.
That's great to know. We'll maybe talk about the pros and cons of doing a dedicated podcast or going from a live stream to a podcast. What's the name of your podcast? I don't know whether you mentioned it.
It's Link In with Louise.
Linked In with you, Louise. Awesome.
Yeah.
Janet, how about you? Because you did something quite scary relatively recently. You had a very, very successful podcast. I mean, you were like in the top 10 for some of the charts and things like that, and you've been going. Well, tell us the story, because it is scary. I feel scared just listening to this. But tell us.
I started a podcast. I think it was 2017. Just got a little bit too close to the camera then. I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, I don't like seeing myself that close up. So all was going well. I did 4 years. Had over 1 million downloads, and I was also trying to look at the camera as well. And I did 450 episodes, and I just kind of got to the point where I felt like it was time for something new. And my podcast editor even said to me, I think you're making the wrong decision. I think this is a really bad decision. But I wasn't bored of it. That wouldn't be true to say. I still enjoyed doing it, but I felt I could do better. I felt things had moved on. I think my business had moved on a lot since I started. And so I just stopped it and started it again. So I launched a new podcast called the Courageous Content Podcast, because I guess it's quite courageous to stop a podcast that's doing well. And I launched that in April. So I took a break. It was only about maybe 5 or 6 weeks in the end. And I launched a new podcast, and it's going well. And I'm back up at the top of the charts with my new podcast. It was a little bit scary to leave all that content behind. And I've had a few like bumpy moments where my old podcast, will come back up the charts, and I'm like, no, I don't want you to listen to that one. I want you to listen to the new one. So I really do think it was the right thing to do, because I think that I didn't want to be that person. Actually, the last review on my Apple, and I don't think this is fair, actually. I think this is just someone being nasty, which maybe we can get into, says this podcast used to be good and now it's this, that, and the other. Because people are a bit mean like that. No, I don't necessarily agree that was true. I think it was still offering value, but I wouldn't want to get to the stage where I agreed with that and thought actually this podcast used to be good. And I'm a big believer in, like, just because you can do something, like my podcast editor said, oh, well, you know, it's doing really well, you could carry on, but that doesn't mean you should do it just because you can. So yeah, all's well that ends well. So.
No, that is definitely a courageous decision. And I assume that if, you know, you did have an audience from the old podcast that have moved on to the new podcast. So it wasn't like starting completely from scratch, but it's still scary. It's still scary. And there's still that possibility that not all of the people who listen to the old podcast are going to move over to the new one. But we can maybe talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Now, Jeff, you've been waiting very patiently there. Tell us about your podcast. And you're a bit like me in that you use your live streaming in your process to end up with the podcast. So tell us a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, so I've been doing that since the very beginning because mainly I'm really lazy and I don't want to, and I like getting video content too. Now, because to Louise's point, being in somebody's ears is very, very intimate. There's really something special about that. But even back when Google Plus, back when we were doing lives, I have always done my show as a live stream that goes to a podcast, back with Manly Pinterest Tips, which is still there, still getting downloads. But with my new show, the Friday show, the Social Media News Live, we do that as a podcast as well, but we start as a live video. So, but to the point of like Louise and Janet, some of the other shows I produce, like I produced Guy Kawasaki's podcast where he interviews people like, you know, Jane Goodall, you know, just all these big names. And he does the same thing where he records it, but then we go on Wednesdays and do a live show where we talk about the previous podcast, kind of like what Louise does. So I think there's a way you can do both the hybrid model or whatever way works best for your business and your schedule. But for me, I've always been like super, super lazy and I just want to get it all done. And there are some cons with that though. Louise is able to schedule it, work around her kids. When you do a live show like this one here, Ian, is you're kind of locked in. You can't really batch them out, which a lot of podcasters like to do. They like to have a day where they do their podcast and they do 3 or 4 to 6 episodes all in one day, and they have a month's worth of content. When you're doing a live show, you can't really do that. But there's pluses and pros and cons for both models.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you need to work out what's going to be best for you. Like Jeff, I don't think it's laziness. I think that's unfair. I think it is actually, I like to think it's being smart because it's about,
I take a nap when you actually go off screen with me. Actually, I'm just like, bringing back up full screen. So that's how lazy.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we've talked about, I'm interested to know for you, Janet, what was your reason for starting just with a podcast and not do live stream into the podcast? Did you think about that as a way of doing it, or do you like the fact that you can just schedule it and batch it in your own time?
I feel like I want to say it wasn't invented when I started, but that's not true. People were live streaming, but but it wasn't as easy, I think. I was just turning. That was me that was making that terrible racket before. I feel like it wasn't as easy back then as it is now, and I probably wasn't as tech. I probably wasn't as tech savvy or just confident enough to have a go at doing stuff like that. I would have imagined that you could only do that if you were really kind of techie. Yeah. But one thing that really bothers me, and I think this sometimes happens, not for you guys, obviously, present company accepted, but I hate listening to bad audio. So in order to, there's a couple of things actually. So I saw a conversation on my Facebook page the other day where somebody was thinking about starting a podcast and someone else was advising them to go straight in and record a podcast, live stream it, then repurpose it into something else. And that seems really sensible. But actually, this person was really nervous about starting a podcast. When you're doing both, you have to remember that some people are going to be listening and watching. So you have to adapt your presenting style, which is actually I think that's easier to do when you're a bit more experienced as a presenter. If you just started a podcast, I don't think I would have been able to do it. I could probably do it now, but I don't think I could do it then. And the other thing is audio. Like sometimes people, I picked out a podcast to listen to the other day that had clearly started as a live stream, and the audio was so bad that I could just barely listen to it. And obviously people like you guys, you know, you get it perfect. But sometimes I listen to podcasts where I feel that it's okay if the product that you get at the end is still a good product, but if it's maybe a bit rambly and a bit long because you've just whacked out whatever you recorded, if the audio isn't good, I'm not sure that it's going to give you the return on investment. But that's just my 2 pence, and I'm probably too lazy to do.
I think it makes a difference. Jennifer, I think it's also true, and one of the things that Ian talks about when he does his live streams too is like the first thing you upgrade usually isn't your camera, it's your audio, because people will forgive bad video, but they will not forgive bad audio. And that even goes double on a podcast because it's an audio-based platform. So I think your point's well made.
Yeah, so important to think about the audio side of things, whether it's a podcast or a live stream. And one thing that actually, just talking about Restream, that you can do if you're with this today at the end of it, although I'm not making this episode into a podcast, it would be great if I did, because I can download my audio separate to Louise's audio, Jeff's audio, and Janet's all separately. So if Janet has a coughing fit halfway through this, she's not going to spoil it for the rest of us, So we've got I could see we've got who we got here. We've got Good Luck Joseph saying, I'm excited being part of this show. Great to have you here. We've got Hakan watching from Germany. We're truly international here. We've got Ronald watching from the beautiful Croatia. And we've got Katie Simpson saying, hi guys, hi gals. Great to see you, Katie. Hope you're doing well. Louise, any thoughts on what we just talked about there, about turning your live streams into a podcast?
Yes, and actually what Janet said made me think of a couple of times when I've also turned off podcasts, because not just bad audio, but if it's somebody has recorded a Facebook Live, they spend a lot of time engaging with the people who are commenting on whatever they're doing inside there, if it's inside a Facebook group or something. And sometimes you feel like you're outside the window looking in, because you don't really understand what they're talking about, because they might not necessarily be reading it. Like you're really good, Ian, at pulling out these comments and pausing and going through the comments. But if somebody's got something to present and they keep getting distracted by people who are posting in the group, that's fine if you're watching it live. But if you're trying to listen to it afterwards on a podcast, it can be a bit messy, I think, and it would put me off.
Yes.
But also, if somebody has a guest on and the guest doesn't have the proper audio, that's just, you can hear the host really clearly, but the guest's audio is awful. I would turn that off as well.
Well, I want to come back to you on that second point, because that's a really interesting one. But I think when it comes to comments, I think whether you are turning it into a podcast or not, I think you need to plan or structure your show for the replay viewers. And if you're continually in the comments and getting distracted by them, it's going to be really boring for your replay audience. It's certainly going to be boring for your podcast viewers, podcast listeners, as well. And it is hard, because as a live streamer, you've got to think of two audiences. You've got to think about your live audience who are watching live. They can see each other. It's more of a community feel. But you've got to think about the people from the future, and it's more of an intimate feeling, isn't it? Because they're watching on their own. And you don't want them to feel left out or bored by all the comments that you're referring to. But sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just on that same point, Ian. So what I like to do, I always have questions. I don't ever show up without any questions. I have at least 10 questions. We have a lot more for the Friday show. But even when I'm hosting for another company or something, is that I have those questions, but if I see somebody in the comment that's asking a question that's similar, now this comes with practice and doing it over and over and over, but I'll able to see like, okay, that's close enough to what I was going to ask. I'm going to bring their comment up because it flows in the show, but I would rather use my audience's comment than my question because I want to look, even if I'm faking it, I was going to ask that anyway. I want them to feel like I'm listening and watching them. And so being able to do that and balance, I think, takes some time and practice. But once you do it, man, it makes that show flow better. And to like Louisa's point, you don't have that weird, awkward, like you're bringing up comments now kind of, you know what I'm saying? It flows into the show.
Definitely agree with you there. So this coming on to this point that you were making, Louise, about guests audio. I mean, it is a nightmare. I've had this actually not that often, but I did have somebody. We tested the equipment. It all worked beautifully, and when they then came onto the show the following week, they were in a different setting. They were not. I think when we tested it, they were using their computer. They decided to come on their iPad. How do we stop this? I'm interested. Janet, you've had a lot of guests onto your show. What do you do to kind of make sure that your guests' audio is okay?
Well, my top tip is to send them the guide that I cribbed off you for when you produced my live event.
You nicked.
Yeah, you said when you produced my live event, I think as part of it, we ended up using something of yours. So I've adapted that and I send that to them. However, I also have had that experience where you've tested something with somebody beforehand, and then they show up and they're, you know, I think people don't always understand how important it is, or they'll suddenly. The hardest thing I find is sometimes people will buy something, especially for the podcast, that they haven't tested. So they'll buy my worst ones. There's like Madonna headsets. And then they're like, and they've been to Argos and they've bought one of those. If you're not from the UK, Argos is like, I don't know, it's like a Target just for tech, isn't it, kind of thing. And then they'll be like, oh, I've got this really great like Madonna thing, and you'll just be like, oh God, when I see one, I'm like, no. But I think also as a podcast, you get more experience, don't you? You just have to, you have to just test, don't you? And you have to. Sometimes I've had to get, earphones is supposed to be the thing, isn't it? But actually sometimes I've had to get people to get rid of earphones. And I think the more you do it, the better you get at not only briefing people, especially if you've got Ian's guide as well. And then also troubleshooting when they get on the call. But it's definitely worth, I think when I was first podcasting, I used to worry about inconveniencing people, and I maybe didn't do enough of those checks because I was worried about keeping them longer. Whereas now, I just say, look, we're going to get a better piece of content. So I know this is a bit of a pain, but let's move to that room, go over there, whatever, because it can ruin a whole episode. I had to bin an episode with somebody that I was really, really excited about interviewing because there was a problem with the audio, and it's just gutting as somebody who's given you their time, who you feel a bit embarrassed to go back to. So I think it's definitely something that's worth investing time in and worth inconveniencing people for in the nicest possible way.
Definitely. Jeff, what's your experience been in this department? And do you have when it comes to microphones, do you have a particular recommendation for people, for guests coming on?
There's so many good ones. It's like, don't use my computer. But I've had, even with the iPad headsets, if you hold it out there, you can actually, the earbuds, you can, those will work fine for like doing it. Now I'm to the point now that it's not as bad as rescheduling an audio podcast interview, but I will not just do the live. I'll say, we'll just not do it because it's not worth their time or mine messing with if their connection is horrible. I had somebody call in one time from an elevator and I'm like, what? This is what are you doing? They're at a conference and I'm like, this isn't gonna, just don't. And so you gotta, it's better just to cancel it and then come on real quick and say to the guest, hey, we're having, and your audience will love you for it and they'll understand if you go on and go, listen, we had some major tech issues. This is live video. This is what happens, but we're going to reschedule, Ian to come on next week when we can figure out what's going on, because it's just not worth it. And it's amazing. Jay Bear had something that he used to do. He used to send people for his podcasts the mic to use. He would send it to him. He'd either buy it to him or it'd be so it's that important. I have the same thing, Ian, is when people will come and, they'll test it and we like, yeah, this is great. And then they'll call from like their office. And I'm like, but we tested from your house. Why? It doesn't work. So anyway.
Oh dear, yeah. We can all talk about those bad experiences. I'm sure. If you have had some bad experiences, if you're watching live or the replay, we'd love to know from you. Have you been a guest on a podcast or a live show? Have you had guests on? We'd love to hear your stories. I can see we've got, let's have a look who we've got. We've got Lavinia watching from the Netherlands. Did my first live broadcast yesterday and didn't see that it went out live on LinkedIn. Well, that's good. It's really good that you went out on LinkedIn. That's great. And we've got Roy from London. Great to see you. And we've also Katie saying, gotta love Argos headsets. And Katie also says, was it Ian in the elevator? We call them lifts in the UK.
Lifts.
Anyway.
Oh yeah. So Ian usually has to have a little stand so he can get up and hit the buttons. So he's got a little thing he can. I try to help him out, lift him up so he can.
I knew there was a reason I shouldn't have invited Jeff on the show. Anyway, before Janet needs to go, I want to ask, in terms of like inviting guests onto the show, how do you go about finding guests? And this can be a question for either coming onto your live stream or onto your podcast. And I would just say, do your research. But I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into this than just that. So Janet, why don't you start and let us know what you do? What's your plan when it comes to guests?
Okay, before I do, did anyone see that great live video moment where I moved the pink dot that I used? Because I thought I wasn't looking in the camera and then managed to put it over the camera. So I thought that was a great live video moment. And then you sort of, yeah, that sort of thing would have sent me, like, I would have been ashamed for weeks before I got experience at live video. Anyway, so this is one of my favorite topics because a lot of people pitch me for my podcast, for the one I have now and the one before. And I think I've only ever said like yes to one or two, because so many people are bad at pitching, and those people who send those, like, who hire those agencies to send them like really bad pitches on their behalf. I used to be a journalist, so I have to really like hold myself back from sending like sarcastic replies and saying this is like the worst pitch I've ever seen. So I just sort of ignore them. But most people, I mean, it's really, really basic stuff. You know, they have never listened. They haven't even had the courtesy just to have a little thumb through and pretend that they've listened. Like, I mean, at least pretend you've listened, and that would be good. So I get most of my own guests, and with my new podcast, actually, I how can I put this? Again, present company accepted, but I got to the point where I was like, I want to. I think I learned the most content-wise. I think you see me like trying to say this diplomatically, from people who are not marketing experts. And I was increasingly watching people on TikTok and think, wow, that's such great content. I've got so many great ideas. And I wanted to create something where I wasn't just wheeling out the same old marketing experts that you see on every show. That's not to say I'm never going to have anyone like that, but I actually sort of actively look for talent, and I'm looking for stories. I'm looking for I'm just looking for things that really interest me, and people with great stories to tell people. And because I think people who aren't marketers often are the most creative, because they just start creating content and they're not as self-conscious. They don't have all of this imposter syndrome and all the rest of it. So that was just, but that's in itself, I think, says a lot, because that's like my editorial policy, if you like. So I am looking for specific types of people and specific types of guests. So for example, someone that I know sent me a pitch the other day, and it was a little bit awkward because I was like, well, could you just have a listen, or just have a pretend that you've listened and flick through the and then came back and then sent me a load of stuff that wasn't suitable, even though I'd tried to explain. So one of the things I have done is I've created like a one-pager that send to people. I've got an application form. So for me, I've got something very specific in mind that I'm looking for, and I will go and look for it myself. It's great if somebody cracks it for themselves and get in touch. It's like brilliant, but it's just so rare for somebody to actually take the trouble to put together a decent pitch, to understand what you're looking for, even when you send it to them or even when you tell them. So yeah, I actively have a very strong sense, always have done, of what I do want and what I don't want. And I will go out and look for it, and I'll reach out to the person. And that can be a bit vulnerable, because sometimes people say no to me, or sometimes they say, who are you weird person reaching out to me? But I think that gets a better result. So that's my guesting strategy. And now I'm like, is that what you actually asked me, Ian? I think it was what you asked.
It is. I'm just, to people like say, why did you reach out to me, you weird person, on a regular basis, Janet?
No,
They do to me. They say that all the time. Yeah.
I try to write quite nice emails, nice friendly emails. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've got some comments, some kind of thoughts on this. So kind of frustrations with guests who won't turn off the TV in the background, or another one, this is from Merger Rising, guests showing up from a New York City street, the noise. So we've had some bad ones. And Katie says, Janet's new podcast is mega. The episode showing you how to do an Insta reel was genius in how to explain a visual thing using audio. And that's always a challenge, isn't it, doing that.
I felt like I'd never wanted to do it ever again. It was so hard explaining how to do something. It was like the most hardest thing I've ever done, but people successfully made reels, so I was pleased with that.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, Janet, it is past. So if you want to go away, in a nice way, of course, that you are welcome to.
Go away, Janet. Go away.
It's been great to have you on. But before you do, you've got an event coming up, and it's just to let us also know what else you're working on before you go, and how people can find out more about you.
So I just happen to have here some that I made earlier.
Love that.
So I've just launched my my planner. So I have an A4 desk planner. It's actually my 6th year of doing it. This was my first ever planner. And I just made a TikTok about this, about how you have to just put stuff out there, because just look at that compared to, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but this is like hardback. Actually, that's a dummy copy, which is the cover's not great on that one, but it's hardback. It's like so much better quality paper, layout, all the rest of it. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that as a kind of just launch it, just get it out there. But so I've just launched my Courageous Content Planner. It's an A4 desk diary. It's got content plan. It's got loads of content ideas and prompts, and it will save you a lot of time with your content. The pre-order just finished yesterday, but you can still get one. And I'm also hosting the most amazing event with some guy called Ian Anderson Gray, who is my event producer, called Courageous Content Live. It's a live content planning event. You get your content plan created for 2022 at the event, and you'll also get 80 social media posts. So the focus is still very much on getting your plan created and creating loads of content at the event. And Ian's the event producer, and we do have lots of exciting things up our sleeve. The last time we worked together, we made a song, didn't we? and we recorded a song together, didn't we? And so yeah, I'm looking forward to what we come up with.
We should get Jeff with his banjo to come in.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, when I played that in high school, I just had to just beat the women off. It was just, they would just come flocking. I would have to it was horrible. Mobs.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So anyway, I felt a little bit like I was on QVC then, but they were just there, and but thank you so much for having me, and for my little pitch at the end. But Courageous.
Is it available for the US audiences or just UK?
The event, no.
What about your planner too?
The planner too, yes,
Okay.
it is. Yeah, it is.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Jeff. I'll pay you later.
It is worldwide, and same with the event as well.
With the event. So thanks so much for having me, and sorry I've got to run, but it's been It's been busy. See you later.
Good to see you again.
Bye, Jeff. See you later.
Janet.
See you.
Bye, see you later.
Well, there you go. That's very exciting. So just to have a look, we've got a question here as well, and I'd be interested to know what you guys think. So Hakan saying, do you use the traffic from your website? When yes, what kind of tools and time you spend it? So I just wonder whether this, Hakan, whether you are talking about in terms of promoting your live streams and your podcasts. Louise, how do you use your website to promote your streams and your podcasts?
I certainly use the website for the podcast, and I email the podcast out to my email list the day it goes out live. What I've started to do actually recently is that I'm writing longer blog posts about a particular thing on LinkedIn. So it might be your LinkedIn profile, and then I record the podcast episode about that, and I tie that into it's like the show notes become a blog, if you like. And then what I'm also doing is making YouTube videos about that as well, which I embed into the blog post. So I'm kind of taking one piece of information and using that for my blog, my podcast, my YouTube, and then the live stream as well. Amy Woods would be just like delighted with me, content repurposing queen that she is. So it's I get a lot of traffic to the website I think, because of all that content I'm putting out on a regular basis. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Well, it's just, I'm just interested in how I think when it comes to promotion, there are loads of different things that we can do. And often we can forget the website. I mean, I'm thinking about doing a lot of social media and emails and stuff like that. But obviously our website can be part of that strategy. How about you, Jeff? Well, how do you use your website for your promotion of live streams and podcasts?
Well, can I go back and answer the one about getting guests? Because I think that's something that really people struggle with.
I have information about that too.
Yeah, because you just kind of blew off Louise when you asked Janet, and I wanted to really answer that question.
Well, but I was going to come back to that.
So I wanted to say the best way to get guests when you're first starting, at least for me, is, and this ties into the repurposing thing, is that I chop up all my episodes and I push them out, and it's you hardly ever see my face on those repurposed content. It's mostly always my guests, and I'm always pushing out. If you go through my Twitter feed, you'll see every day I've got a new clip of somebody, like Doc Rock went out today and some other people, and it's promoting them. I'm promoting them. The more people see you promoting them, the more people want to be on your show. And so that has really helped me, I think, get guests, is because they're like, oh, this is going to be a waste of my time. He's going to use it's not going to be one time and it's going to be done. He's going to use this stuff over and over and over and over. And I mention them in my posts. It really drives me nuts when people don't do that. Like, give them credit, let them follow their Twitter account and subscribe to them. And so the more you do that, I think the more high quality guests you can get, because they know, that's going to be, their face is going to be out there, and everybody loves self promotion. So I would do that. And to the repurposing thing, I used a script. I love that. That's changed the way I do podcasts. It's changed the way I do live video, and being able to do that lets me split up those things and make those little bit of the posts that you go out. And all those, not only do they promote my guests, but also it leads back. If you want to watch the full episode, I embed it like Louise does, the video from YouTube on my blog post page, and also have the full transcript below. And I also embed the podcast. So it's all on one page. They can subscribe, they can watch, they can listen. Everything's all at once. So that's what I do.
Thanks for that. No, that's great. And how about you, Louise, when it comes to guests? I mean, how often do you get pitched? And tell us how you find your guests.
I probably don't get pitched as much as everybody else here, but I do get pitched, and I get not great pitches. Kind of like what Janet said. It's like, have you actually listened to what my podcast is about? People telling me that they've got lots of agencies saying, I've got somebody amazing for your show. Here's what they do. They've got a book coming out about, productivity. And I'm like, my podcast is about how to use LinkedIn for business. Or they pitch me somebody who does what I do. Like, what are you doing? I don't want this person on my show so I could talk about how amazing they are at teaching you how to use LinkedIn. So a lot of people, I do have a really good friend, Julie Fry, who is brilliant at getting people on the podcast. So, Julie flies the flag for great agency to get you onto podcasts, but a lot of people seem to do it in a very blanket way, where it's a copy and paste, and they just send it out to everybody to try and land some podcasts. I prefer to pick my own guests, I have to say, and it's usually quite strategic. So, for example, tomorrow I'm going to be interviewing Lindsay Cambridge of Jammy Digital, because I've got a new service coming out where I'm helping people with their content planning for LinkedIn. So Lindsay and I are going to talk about the importance of content. So it's really strategic. So I know she's brilliant at content. She also has a content 90-day challenge starting in the next couple of weeks. So it all ties in really nicely together. So I'd much prefer to be in charge of what's going on in my show and bringing guests on that, suit my what my strategic direction is as well. I mean, I'm laughing at myself. If I listen to myself back, I'm like, oh, Louise, when did you become such a businesswoman?
Oh, I love it.
Dear. Something sunk in down the way.
That's great. It's great. We're all on this journey, aren't we? But that's. I mean, I think I just wonder what you both think. Do you think if we're wanting to go on other people's live streams or other people's podcasts, how should we bother pitching? I mean, we've basically, I think we've all said that it's very rare that we'll ever, if we're pitched, that we'll accept the pitch and bring them onto the show. So do you think pitches ever work? Should we bother? And how do we get on somebody's show?
I have, well, if you don't mind, Jeff, if I go first on this.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What I have done in the past, and it works really well, is if there's somebody who you really want to get on their podcast, follow them on social media and interact with their content. When they post on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever they spend the most time, actually engage with their content, listen to the podcast, and then leave comments about the podcast and what you enjoyed about it, what you liked about it, and kind of become visible to that person. I did pitch a podcast myself recently just because it sounded really cool. It was about it's for private investigators in the US. And I thought that sounds really interesting. So I pitched it and I said, I'm not really sure how I can come on your podcast, but I think it sounds fabulous. So can I come on and talk about LinkedIn? And she said, yes. She said, yeah, let's come on and talk about LinkedIn, private investigators, how they can use LinkedIn. So I did.
I love that. But I just wonder whether, because you weren't that forceful, you just say, I love your podcast. And I'd love to find a way. You weren't saying, I am this LinkedIn expert and I need to come onto your show to do, I just wonder whether that honesty I think that would resonate more with me if somebody did that. No, I can't wait to hear that episode. It sounds fascinating. How about you, Jeff? What have you got any tips when it comes to this?
So Louise is spot on about that. I mean, and that does not go for being, invited to be on a podcast, but it goes for everything. So I can trace back where my business has gone from interacting on, for example, like I said, I do Guy Kawasaki's podcast and his live show. That all I can trace all the way back to Google Plus when I interacted with Peg Fitzpatrick over there on her post, and we developed a friendship and relationship. And now 5 years later, I mean, now I'm doing this because of that relationship. Now, understand, I didn't pitch them or interact and then like a week later go, hey, can I be on your show? Never have I done that. That doesn't work either. So people can smell fishiness a mile away. So you want to make sure that you really do develop a relationship. The cool thing about being a podcaster or a live video host or any of that stuff is once you start doing it and you're doing it consistently, people will start invite you on their shows. They'll know, like, I know Louise, like I wrote down a note, like we've got to get her on the Friday show because she's a LinkedIn expert. We haven't had a LinkedIn expert on yet. I'm going to write that down because I know her. She does great live video. She's got a great camera. Her audio sounds good. There's already some pre-qualifications that have happened. You know what I mean?
Realize this, Louise, you were being tested.
Yes, that's the only reason I come on Ian's show is to steal his guests. The whole reason. But what that is, you start borrowing each other's audiences, and what happens is you start growing, and you've got to be really careful. And I've seen a lot of people do this: is when they finally do get on a show, they move the conversation to always be back to themselves. They're always like, and my course, if you want to find out more what I can do, you can get my course, or I answered this question on my course, Ian. Let me tell you about my course. That just grosses you out and you're not going to be invited back again. No. So, I mean, you want to go in and provide value. At the end, almost every good host will ask where they can find you. That's when you wait to tell them where you can, sign up for your newsletter or whatever that stuff. Yeah. So don't be too eager when you get on to push your stuff. Be there and give information.
So true. So true.
Ian, what do you think about as a tactic to get on like big podcasts or good podcasts, starting a podcast yourself and inviting those hosts on as your guest and raising your visibility that way?
I think that's a great idea. And it's when I launched my show, my Confident Live show, I came up with reasons why I was doing it, because I think you have to be clear. What are the reasons why you're launching this show? What are your goals? And one of them was kind of what Jeff was saying, being lazy. It means smart. and wanting to be able to repurpose content. One of them was to do with positioning myself as an expert in the field in the world of live video. But one of them was actually just building relationships. And part of that was just having fun. I mean, you know, I've met so many amazing people over the years. I just wanted an excuse to get them onto the show and have a chat. But it does have there is a slight selfish side to it, which is that hopefully at some point they might ask me back onto their show, and that has happened. But don't expect these things to happen overnight. You know, these building relationships takes time, and you've got to put effort into it. It's like, you know, asking somebody out for a date. You know, you don't kind of propose straight away. You've got to woo them. Not that I have had a huge amount of expertise.
Easy there, Tex. Come on. I this hang up button's really close, buddy. I'm telling you, right?
Moving on quickly. Let's talk about what happened when I was wooing Helen, who is my wife, by the way. Martin is saying, if you are good at what you do and visible on social media and an expert in a particular and interesting niche, the podcast host should come to you. I would definitely agree with that. Yeah. Dr. Elo is in the house watching on YouTube. Great to see you, Dr. Elo. Dr. Elo was a guest on my show just the other day. It was great to have you on. So we are getting towards the end of the show. If you are watching live or replay, let us know your thoughts on this subject when it comes to podcasting and live shows. And the next question I want to ask is the biggest challenge that you have when it comes to, and this can be to do with podcasting or live streaming, but what's the biggest challenge you've had, and what do you think, if somebody is starting now with live streaming or podcasting, what do you think the biggest challenge is? Starting off with you, Louise.
Oh goodness. Well, I actually haven't posted a podcast in the last 2 weeks, which will basically tell you what my challenge is. It's been a bit hectic here in, it's not, I was going to say Brogan Family Towers, that's not in our house, with my youngest starting a new school. And I thought, you know what, Louise, give yourself a bit of grace and take your foot off the pedal for a bit. And I didn't put out the podcast, and it felt really, really weird. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I could easily not do this, but that is not going to serve my business. So being consistent, and I think in the almost 4 years that I've had it, I've only really missed about 2 weeks. So that shows like that's a big thing for me to have missed the last 2 weeks. So being consistent, and I know you're supposed to batch and all of that stuff, but I am not that organized. So I don't batch. So, but if you're starting out, you know, get a microphone. Find out the easiest way to do it. I've always had an editor since the very, very start, because I tried to figure out how to do it myself. And I thought, this is going to wreck my head and I'll never actually get this podcast out. So I've had a local Northern Irish editor since the very start, and he's super. Him and I worked out that as long as I had my podcast to him on the Friday, he would have it out for me on the Wednesday. So I know I have my deadlines, and I have been known to nobody except myself in my office to record it on a Friday morning, just so that I have it for the next week. But, you know, everyone works differently. It's one of those things. I just can't get ahead of myself on it. Over the summer I did, because I knew it was going to be a bit hectic. So I did actually record all the summer episodes, and then I ran out of them, and then I just took a break. So trying to be consistent and planning ahead, but it is my big weakness, I have to say.
It is tricky, and I know you're not the only one. I go through phases of batching and not batching. With the live show, I obviously can't batch, so it's on a Tuesday and a Thursday, but I batch everything else. So the editing of the podcast, I do these silly reels that I do to promote my podcast, and I batch all of those things. But sometimes life gets in the way, and these things don't happen. I can see that, you know, for example. So Lavinia is saying, for me, it's working out all the IT side of things. And I think you're not alone. I'd be interested to know, Lavinia, what is it is there a specific part of that? Is it getting started with going live? Is it the microphones, connecting it all up? Is it the software? Because we're here to help. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do these shows on Restream, is to support you and help you. But know that you're not alone. It's getting a podcast editor, getting other people to help is definitely a place to start. I can edit, but I prefer not to. Jeff, what about you? Do you do what are your challenges when it comes to all of this?
So I'm going to take it because from somebody who's just getting started too. And I go back to what Louise was saying. It's that consistency. They say most podcasts stop after the 7th episode.
Yeah.
So
true,
being consistent. And the problem, what will happen when you first get started, and this goes for a live or a podcast, is you will have no viewers or no listeners. Everybody starts at 0, and it can be very discouraging when you're first starting and it seems like nobody is listening, and you go through the 10th episode and you go through the 15th episode, you've done it for a month or 6 months and it's still not growing. It's consistency. It's starting to get it's a long game. And now luckily that I feel that if I don't show up, I'm letting my community down. Like I have people who show up every week to watch the show and that get the podcast. And I'm like, I've got to be there for them or have some plan in place. Now, like Louise, like if you miss one, it's okay. That's okay, because you know, it's not going to, snowball into, oh my gosh, it's gone 3 months and I haven't done a podcast. It's not going to happen. And so taking a break, like a mental health break, or like, oh my gosh, all my kids are sick, I can't do it. That's okay. Your audience will forgive that. But you can't get into the habit of like, oh, it's easy, I'll just skip it. And so it's the consistency that makes all the difference. And I like live shows because it makes me be consistent. Like if I don't show up, and also when you start and you can get sponsors, like if you don't do a show, you don't get paid. And so that's really true as well. So, and that's another key thing, is you can work in those things like, I'm not going to be able to do this if I don't do this. You make those little goals for yourself. Like, I'm going to go out to eat. Like I would go get sushi after every Friday show for a long time. That was my reward to myself. I would go out and get sushi. You could eat. No, even Ian can't have sushi. Dang it. So we can't even do that.
There's vegetarian sushi, but
that's not sushi. Anyway, but give yourself a reward and give that, like, okay, I've done this. I put out a podcast. I'm going to, I'm going to go watch a movie or do something, but give yourself a reward where you're moving. But it's a consistency thing, is like Louisa is saying, is the most important thing. And the viewers will come, and the it's a long game, and it doesn't happen overnight. Gary Vaynerchuk started at 0. Everybody starts at 0.
Yeah.
So
it's true. Now, I'd love to know from you watching, what is your equivalent of sushi that you would give to yourself as a reward? Would it be going to, I don't know, watching something on Netflix, having a meal? Let me know. And Dr. Elo is showing some great advice here. Finding a safe practice platform to get better at public speaking or talking to the lens. Whether it could be Instagram stories, it could be a Facebook group, something like that, where you can make all your mistakes. It doesn't matter, which is great. And what's this from the Luke Talks? It's a question. Tell all about the gaming live streaming possibilities. I assume you're talking about gaming and live streaming games. One of the great things with Restream is all the different channels that you can broadcast that are particularly focused on gaming. It's not just Twitch. And by the way, Twitch is not just gaming now. I know that Jeff, you use Twitch and for your wood carving lives, which is great. But there are lots of other channels you can use as well with that. I'm not sure if there's anything specifically you wanted to talk about. You want us to talk about, Luke, on that. And what is this from Lavinia? It is, okay, so your issue is the linking onto the social platforms. So presumably going into Restream, it's then connecting it up to YouTube, Facebook, and all those things. I mean, using Restream Studio is fairly
amazing.
It's just fairly easy. You just click on the links and it does it all for you.
Oh, can I raise my hand? The other thing is, I'm going to make sure, because we were talking about, getting guests on and how that you borrow each other's audiences. That's what's so cool about Restream pairs is like, I can come in now, you give me a link, and we're able to go out to you can use, you share channels. And like on our last show I had with Doc Rock, he went on all his channels, and that it just increases my visibility that people might want to subscribe to me. So that is a big game changer that Restream Pairs is allowing us to do. So I wanted to make sure to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it works in Restream Studio. It also works if you use a third-party tool with Restream like Ecamm Live or OBS Studio. It now allows you to share it out to your guests. It's not just sharing it though, is it? It's actually them broadcasting it and the comments. And this is something I forgot to mention last week when I was talking about it. So if we're broadcasting to Jeff's channel, all of Jeff's super fans who are commenting will come onto the same chat here, and the same with Louise's. So it is awesome. I love this from Dr. Elo, who says, "A big beer is always my reward."
I should get a big beer after this show, actually. That sounds good. Well, hey, Louise, I want to talk about pairs. The cool thing is before you were limited, you could only have one LinkedIn account.
Yes.
When you're streaming to LinkedIn Live, but now like Ian, I could tie in my LinkedIn Live, he could tie in his, and so
we should have been doing that today.
Yes, I mean it's amazing now because LinkedIn you were only like to have one per account.
Yeah.
But I do it for Guy's show. Like when I'm on his show, I stream it to his LinkedIn Live, to my LinkedIn Live, to Peg's LinkedIn Live. So it's really, really cool.
That's so exciting. That is really exciting.
It is a game changer. It definitely is. And another question here from the Luke Talks: can we get multiple screen sharing options? So I think you can share your screen, and your guest can share a screen as well. And they're adding new features all the time to Restream Studio. If you want to do any more kind of customizable things, if that's the right word, you can use third-party tools with Restream like OBS Studio if you're on a PC, or Ecamm Live on a Mac, and you can do other things as well. There's so much we could get into, really is, if you want to get really, really geeky. So we're almost out of time, but just the final thing is, which we probably don't have enough time to talk about, but is the editing of the podcast and then finally promoting it out there. So I think, Louise, you've already said you have a guy who does it all for you.
Yeah.
And Jeff, do you edit your own podcast yourself?
Yeah, I do everything now. It's like I said, the script is a game changer. So it's you upload your show, it makes a transcript, and you edit the transcript, which reflects to the audio and the video. So you can take out all your filler words, you can chop it up and go to, like I do, and make all the little social clips. So everything for me starts with the transcript, and it's a game changer. So the script, that's what I use. Now I do use Audition. I take it and sweeten the sound and all the stuff, but to take those big chunks and really make them manageable, the script.
It is great. And Restream integrates really well with the script. So you can download your video or your audio from Restream into it, and you can even upload it from the script and stream it as a live stream if you want to kind of get rid of all your imperfections. You've got that option as well. D7 says, "Sorry, I'm late." You're not late. It's just great to have you here. There's, and obviously there will be a replay, so do feel free to watch the replay after we're finished. Promotion. So let's finish with this. Start with you, Jeff. How do you promote your live streams and your podcasts? Do you just use social? Do you use email? Have you got any other tips for us?
So I use this. See how I do? I'm using Ecamm so I could bring it in. So you could actually... I've started using a text-based thing for everybody. I promise them no spam, but if they want to sign up to get reminders for my show, they can text this number. But I also do what Louise does and use the emails. I always do that. I do that before my show, saying, because I go a live show and I say, hey, Ian's going to be on the show. We'll be talking about this. Make sure you join in. And that gives them a reminder before the show begins. So that's what I do.
Awesome stuff. Cool. And Louise, what's any tips from you?
Yeah, I do share it across my social media, but my main social media is LinkedIn. But LinkedIn are bringing out a thing. I don't think they've done it yet. With the LinkedIn events and LinkedIn Live are going to be connected. So at the minute, you can schedule your LinkedIn Live, I think like 7 days in advance, and tell your network to go and click the reminder button. But they're going to be bringing out a new thing where it actually creates an event around your LinkedIn Live as well. And then I think the idea is that people are having conversations in the event around your LinkedIn Live. So waiting to see what that looks like. But yeah, I also then, my LinkedIn Live streams, I also stream live onto YouTube with them as well. I'm a baby at YouTube. I just hit my first 1,000 subscribers, having a lot of fun playing around in that pond at the minute. But yeah, email, I would say, because I've got quite a engaged email list. They open my emails and they read them, and that's probably where I get most of my traffic for my podcast. And then I also tell them when I'm going live and let them know where to click on to get the reminder button.
Awesome. Yeah, we so easy to forget email. You know, it might be old technology, but it still works.
It works.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great. Louise, how can we find out more about you and your website, your socials, and what you're working on next?
Sure. My website's louisebrogan.com. I'm LinkedIn with Louise pretty much everywhere. You come connect with me on LinkedIn if you want, and send me a message when you do, because then I'll know where you came from. And actually Monday, I didn't tell you this yet, I'm doing a free training on Monday about how to use LinkedIn for business at 7 p.m. UK time. And it's a LinkedIn event on my LinkedIn company page. So it's LinkedIn with Louise on LinkedIn. So many L words. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. We'll forgive you. That's awesome. Thank you for that, Louise. And Jeff, how can we find out more about you?
Oh, you can just find out me at socialmedianewslive.com. Yeah, so that's where the Friday show is, and I already showed you guys the you can text me here to get reminded about the show. See,
cool.
That's what's so cool about when you do this. They have no control. I have all the control.
I know. Well, I could boot you out, I suppose. That's probably the best thing. Which is what I'm going to do very shortly. Well, thank you guys thank you, Louise. Thank you, Jeff. It was also great to have Janet on earlier as well. And thank you so much for either watching us live or the replay. We really appreciate you. This is not the end of, well, it is the end of the podcast now, but we'll be relaunching with something new very soon. And I can't wait to be sharing that with you. Do check out Louise and Jeff and Janet as well. But I think that's it. I'm going to boot you guys into the green room. Been great to see you. And until next time, I encourage you to launch your podcast now. Not next week. It has to be now. And I'll see you soon. Toodaloo. Bye.